Taiwan did not handle SARS very well, but it learned from that mistake. It learned that it had to act early. It had to not trust the information coming out of China, from mainland China. You know, the most important thing for you to do is to focus on the welfare of your people, to make sure that you are thinking about that more than symbolism and slogans and gestures. You have an actual country.
You mentioned Taiwan's model of battling the pandemic. And so we're very proud of it, and thank you very much for acknowledging it. However, you also implied that the Danes are a model that, the U.S. should learn from. So could you give Taiwan some suggestions as to where there might be space for improvement for us?
You have achieved this success in the pandemic, even though you do not have a very large government and you do not spend a lot on healthcare. You achieve extraordinary results with healthcare, with spending that is, as a percentage of GDP, 1/3 of what the United States spends. Taiwan is one of the lowest expenditures on healthcare, because you really work your doctors very hard, maybe too hard. Yeah. And maybe that is not sustainable in the future. But it's also a very good, elegantly designed system. I think the fundamental things Taiwan can learn from the Danes and from that model is going to be very important, because you are going to transition to a larger welfare state, but you retain the dynamism that allows the economy to do well. So I would imagine that for the Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, those are really the only three countries that have achieved that level of economic success. But for them, Northern Europe will be a very interesting and important model.
You point out that among the countries that have successfully contained the virus up until now, some have big governments and others have small governments. But no matter the size, these countries all have what you refer to as quality of government. How can we create a government that is a quality government?
Good bureaucracies staffed by high-quality technocrats who are given independence. There are countries in Northern Europe, like Denmark, and countries in East Asia, like Taiwan. And I think what they have in common has been a reverence for education, an appreciation of the role of government in protecting and preserving. You have to work together. In Taiwan, I don't have to tell you, you are an island, born in hostile circumstances, and therefore you have always had that collective instinct, that understanding that there are some things that have to be done. Part of it is that emphasis on education translates into high quality people going into government, high quality people staying in government. The real trick is recognizing that government is a very difficult, serious enterprise. We used to understand that in America because it was the government that got the United States out of the Great Depression. But ever since Reagan, there has been a tendency to look down on the government and to just worship the private sector. We need a balance. We need to recognize the private sector does what it does very well, but the government needs to do what it does very well. The countries that did well out of this, they're really the best. And Taiwan, as you know, I think basically is really at the top. Also humble in learning. So Taiwan did not handle SARS very well, but it learned from that mistake. It learned that it had to act early. It had to not trust the information coming out of China, from mainland China. It had to implement bans, and it had to centralize control so that it could make decisions very quickly. Everyone makes mistakes. The smart people learn from those mistakes, and the smart countries learn from those mistakes. The question, I say, Bill Gates says that whenever all the time he was running Microsoft, he would ask himself two questions every time he confronted a problem. Who is doing this better? And what can I learn from them? And if you have that attitude, you're likely to succeed.
So you also mentioned that the pandemic has wiped out almost all our effort for the past quarter of a century in improving inequality. So in order to eliminate inequality, do you think the only option is for countries to work independently, or do you think there is a possibility for international cooperation?
Well, my hope is that there will be international cooperation. But so just to paint the picture as you do correctly, but to remind people, in the last 25 to 30 years, we've moved about 400 to 500 million people out of poverty. extraordinary achievement, more than probably in the previous 100 years. IMF and the World Bank estimate that 150 million of those people will be pushed back into poverty this year alone. And probably you will see, some large number, another 50 or 75 million pushed back. So you are talking about almost 225 million people who are likely to be pushed back into poverty over the next year or two. I hope that once we get past the initial phase, countries will recognize that, we need to be in this together. Part of it is good public health. We're not really safe until we manage to vaccinate the world. But we should take it as an opportunity to say, if we can cooperate on public health.
Globalization is not dead, but you say we might kill it. And can you give us some suggestions on how a small country like us, like Taiwan, can weather this wave of globalization?
So globalization basically is a human instinct and a desire for connection. There's no way you would be able to produce the billions and billions of doses of vaccine that you need if you did not have very complex global supply chains. And some of it does end up getting concentrated in one country. 60% of the world's pharmaceuticals are now made in India. Now, I say in the book, at the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union did $2 billion of trade a year. The United States and China do $2 billion of trade every day. And that gives you a sense of the magnitude of the shift. Now, the problem, as you well know, is that globalization has not benefited as much certain groups of people in the Western world, which is the populism in the Western world, which says close things down, and the rise of China. And then you have an easy way to understand how you are going to end up with a much more hostile set of relations between the two richest countries in the world. But I think that the most important challenge for you will be to, you are a democracy. And so public passion is important. The leaders at every level in Taiwan have to be particularly careful. It's a little easier to be strategic. The most important thing for you to do is to focus on the welfare of your people, to make sure that you are thinking about that more than symbolism and slogans and gestures. You have an actual country that you have built, and you have created this extraordinary miracle, as I say. And so you want to make sure that you do what you have to do to preserve that miracle. And some of that will involve a balancing act.
That is, Taiwan is indeed, as you said, light between two giants. Here is China, there is the United States, right? And now what do we do? Now, with very limited experience and with limited resources, let's say if our government, Taiwan government, must to make a choice between two extremes. One, spend more money to buy weapons. Number two, as you suggested, spend more money for people's social welfare. If the choice is between these two, what were your recommendation?
I think you have to strike a balance. I don't think you can choose one or the other. And, the truth of the matter is, if you do it right economically, the two kind of can feed each other. At the end of the day, a certain amount of defense spending is government in spending. It's investment. It can boost growth. So it's not entirely a trade-off. But look, I think you cannot remove the deterrent capacity that you have to make sure that China will think once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times before doing something aggressive. I don't think that is their intention. The trick with deterrence is you don't know whether part of the reason that has not been their intention is because they know it will be very costly. You see, so if you remove the deterrent, there is a danger that their calculation shifts. And I think you do not have a lot of margin for error. So I would err on the side of maintaining a deterrent.
The same challenge for Biden to reverse some of the policy for the past 4 years is to get people, the talents, to keep on going to the U.S. So we have already seen some changes since he took office. And what more do you expect to see in the near future?
I hope he takes a much more serious look at this and a much more detailed look, which I think he will, because Trump did many, many, many things to try and discourage immigration to America. I think that if you add them all up, there may be actually as many as 1,000 different policies that he changed at every level. So I think it's very important that all of that get reversed. Because, look, at the end of the day, what is America's greatest competitive advantage in this new world we're all going into? It used to be that the Americans had the most open economy, the best capitalist system. The truth is, the natives have gotten very good at capitalism, right? The Asians have gotten very good at capitalism. Taiwan, China, South Korea, Singapore. I mean, there are all kinds of, even in India, you talk to Indian businessmen, they're fantastic capitalists. And I remember Ronald Reagan had a great line. He said, in this country, nobody cares about your origin. They care about your destination. Mm-hmm. They don't care about where you came from. They care about where you're going. Mm-hmm. And I think that sense of, being able to build this universal nation, that's the great comparative advantage America has.
Right now, that scenario we're having is like people are wondering between the relationship between China and U.S. People are wondering what happens after Trump? How should the two big power resume dialogue? Can you picture a scenario for us?
Trump, in some ways, was his own accelerator. He accelerated trends that were already happening, and he was more blunt and brutal about it. But there was a gathering consensus in America that you needed a different policy toward China, and it needed to be a tougher policy. I don't think people recognize enough that we are really dealing with a different China today. Xi Jinping's China is not Hu Jintao's China. There was a very good book called The Third Revolution, which describes the changes in China. Mao's revolution, creating one political system and policies, Deng Xiaoping's revolution, and now Xi Jinping's revolution. And I think it's on that scale where it really is it's a fundamentally different set of policies. And so there had to be a shift. So I think that the Biden team will be tough on China, will be careful about how they approach it. But I think they are more rational in recognizing that there are also big areas where the United States and China have to cooperate. And I think what the Biden administration will try to do is first go to the European Union and try to come up with a common position that the US and the EU can agree on, probably include Japan in that as well, and then go to China. And that is a smarter and more sensible way to approach it. But you can't do it without China. There is no way to create and sustain an open global world economy without having China have a very important seat at the table. So I think they recognize that. The danger here is there's so much hostility and mistrust on both sides. And there's so much the political dynamic is to be tough.
One of the most influential figure in today's US TV network, what do you plan to achieve with your audience? What's the message you plan to bring to your audience?
I have to continue to do what I do, which is to provide reason, facts, analysis, because, the most scary thing about where we are in America, and it's not just America, is we are entering a kind of post-truth world where there is no truth. There are no facts. There's just opinions. There's just noise. There's just everyone fighting with everyone. And that's not true. There are actual facts. There is actual science. There is analysis that is rooted in facts. So I want to preserve this thing that I have built, which I think is even more precious now than ever before, because, we are moving into a world, not just in America, where people can believe anything. And there are ways to make them believe whatever they want. You can you can do deep fake videos, and you can provide crazy, So there have to be some people who are holding the line and maintaining standards. And so I feel like my job is more important than it's ever been.